as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a bit of questions for Daniel from our side. And if you guys have any other personal questions that you want to do, just type it in the chat function and I will speak it out. Or you can choose to turn on your videos on your audios and ask him yourself. Okay, let's go. So, Daniel, could you tell us a bit about how exactly you came to the decision of where you want to go to law school?
Yep. All right. And first off, thank you for inviting me to speak. It's nice to see, once again, a lot of kind of student-led initiatives during COVID. So I'm really supportive of these initiatives. So thanks for inviting me. So to your question on why I chose my certain law school. So just to back up, I went to law school at the University of Birmingham. I did the 2-year accelerated degree there because I had a previous degree from the University of Toronto. And I guess I chose a UK degree, first of all, because of the international reputation. I've always wanted to work internationally as a lawyer. So I'm originally from Hong Kong, and I've already worked in Hong Kong, and now I'm in Singapore. So these are the two cities I've always wanted to work in. And being kind of previous British colonies, my parents kind of advised me that a British degree would bode well in both cities. So that's what kind of led my thinking to doing a UK law degree versus, say, like a Canadian law degree.
You know, that's
Yeah.
absolutely interesting, but I think what we all really, truly, deeply want to know is why Birmingham?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like, I love the Brummie accent, so that's why. No, I think when I was choosing law schools, I was really restricted to the ones that had a 2-year degree versus a 3-year because, like I said, I have a degree already, so I didn't want to waste any more time, right? So Birmingham was one of the more reputable schools with a 2-year degree at the time, so that's why. And also, weirdly enough, there's like a pretty big contingent of Canadians in Birmingham, in addition to Leicester as well. But Birmingham was one of those kind of like Canadian destinations as well. So it's funny that I ended up there as well.
Yeah, no, out of curiosity, did you ever consider, why didn't you ever choose to consider not going into in-house? What made you make the executive decision that in-house is exactly right for me?
Yeah, you know what, you never know until you actually start practice. So I initially did my TC at Dentons in Canada and then qualified doing M&A work as well. It was only when I went to Hong Kong, my first role there was in-house role. Partly because that was one of the first offers that came back to me. I thought, you know what, it'd be interesting to try private equity. I have no clue what it is. I've only been doing M&A for the past 2 years. So I kind of dove right in, and as a one PQE, doing completely different work in-house was a shock to me because within a law firm you're very protected. It's very hierarchical in that if you're a junior, there's the mid-level and there's a senior kind of rank, so you can actually ask for help. Whereas in-house, my team was basically 4 lawyers or 3 lawyers, myself, which was a 1 PQE. There's a senior counsel, which was a 10 PQE, and then the general counsel was a 15 PQE. So from 1 to 10, there's no one there to help me, right? So it was a steep learning curve. But I really love the fact that within an in-house environment, you get to advise on commercial issues, right? You get to contribute to commercial decisions, and you're not just providing an option, you're providing an option and also standing behind it, which is kind of new for lawyers that are used to only private practice.
That's absolutely brilliant. So for all the future law applicants out there, I'm going to ask a question on their behalf. So what's the difference between private equity and M&A? What's the main difference and how do you feel about it now?
Yeah. So I think there's a misconception that people call private equity law. I don't think there's such thing as that. Actually, private equity law consists of many areas of law. So there's, like you said, M&A. There's general corporate law, corporate sec work. There's commercial law. There's potentially IP, regulatory as well, financial regulatory. There's banking. So it's a collection of all these things. So the difference there is M&A is basically buying and selling companies, right? Whereas private equity, you're facilitating both buying and selling companies and also investment funds. So when, say UBS wants to invest in certain companies in Australia, they would raise a fund. and then they would start basically soliciting the fund to investors, high net worth investors, other institutions to put money into this investment fund. And that's how they do investments that way. So it's kind of, private equity is a bit more broad, but it includes M&A in addition to investment funds.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So we do have some interesting questions that were sent to us. Are you ready for some question rounds? That's going to
Yeah,
be more difficult.
yeah, let's
Right.
go.
Okay, we're going to start with the hard ones, yeah? So what is a qualified capital market lawyer? What licenses do you have to acquire?
What is a qualified capital markets lawyer? So a qualified capital markets lawyer, meaning just a qualified lawyer that's practicing capital markets, I assume?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, like capital markets is a practice area, right? It's banking. It's dealing with IPOs, it's dealing with derivatives, banking heavy, finance heavy. Uh, I mean, there's no real qualification for it. As long as you're a qualified lawyer, you can practice, right? So it just depends on when you're doing your training contract, if you did a seat in capital markets, and then upon, I guess, finishing your TC, do you qualify and sit in that kind of group to do that work? So yeah, there's no such thing as kind of a qualified capital markets lawyer, but you have to be a qualified lawyer to practice capital markets, I guess.
Okay, that's that's a really interesting one about capital market. Okay, second one. How important are negotiation skills when working in-house?
I think it's fairly important only because when you're in-house, despite the fact that you may be a regulatory lawyer or whatnot, you're still a commercial lawyer first. So, and also within in-house, you may be the only lawyer there, right? If you're a startup or if you're in a small team, you're one of four lawyers. So more often than not, anything legal that comes across the desk of anyone in that company will come to you, right? You could be a commercial lawyer, but if they're doing a real estate deal, they're shooting a commercial lease to your way. And even if you've never done a commercial lease, you're expected to know it because you're a lawyer, right? Which is fun, but also very challenging and stressful at the same time because you don't know what's going to come through the door each day, right? But yeah, I think that's once again, as in-house lawyer, you're predominantly commercial lawyer, so you're often kind of going back and forth on terms, conditions, on contracts. I mean, even internally, you're negotiating between stakeholders. So for me, I work with both the funds products team and also the compliance team. Often there's an agreement that they need to agree on, and I'm kind of the middle person. I need to help them facilitate the terms, right? So you're both negotiating internally and externally, which is quite fun if you do like the kind of arbitration kind of work that's involved.
Okay. See now, if I can just extrapolate from what you said about land into the next question, which is, would it be a good option for a recently graduated construction engineer to study law, particularly for land-related cases? And what should he do in this regard? What can be the steps that he should follow in order to pursue this line of law?
Right. So, I mean, if you're a construction engineer, you have a specific skill set that you've kind of trained for already. So if you know what kind of practice area you want to get into and it's related to your initial degree, that's even better because the narrative that you sell to, like whatever firm to hire you, and especially if they have that practice area, it's quite easy for you to sell yourself to say that I've trained in this area, I'm an engineer. Also, now I'm studying law to complement my engineering career, right? And then upon qualification, this is the area in construction that I want to do. I mean, like I highly recommend it if you know exactly what you want to do. It's just how you sell yourself along the way.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, what legal advice or transactional work do you think is involved in restructuring debt within a private equity deal?
Um, okay, shoot that question again. So what kind of,
I think this is a bit content heavy. What legal advice or transactional work is
yeah.
involved in restructuring debt in a private equity deal?
Mm, right. So restructuring debt is part capital markets work. I haven't done a lot of that.
Mhm.
But what I imagine, I've seen a few of it, restructuring debt would mean is that uh, I mean, like if say like you have a fund that's investing in bonds and it kind of folds up, you need to basically deal with all the bondholders to negotiate new terms for your new kind of bond agreement. Same for if it's a loan, right? That's you're dealing with a syndicated credit agreement or whatnot. It's basically just renegotiating terms with the bank and amongst holders or anyone that has an interest in the, I guess, the debt that you're talking about. But yeah, that's a more capital markets kind of banking question, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, so we have a question from T. Would you advise someone who's interested in working in-house to first qualify in private practice to best equip themselves for the nature of work in an in-house role?
Short answer, yes. So why I say this is because majority of the training contracts that you have are going to be from private practice. Very rarely will you see a training contract from in-house. So unfortunately, you have to kind of funnel through this private practice first before leaving. I have seen people that have jumped into into in-house right away after law school. Uh, I think the work is really interesting and they gain a lot of commercial awareness through that role. But I think one thing that they do lack is the basic kind of core skills as a lawyer. So legal drafting, legal writing, contractual analysis. I mean, even drafting memos, right? These are the core skills that you will learn in private practice. And especially with in-house, most of the time it's whatever comes to the door. So if you want to practice your drafting skills, but you only have contracts to review, you won't get to practice that as much. And also, like if you're, say, like your company is dealing with a lot of, say, just agreements, but they're not on any deals, and you want to do more M&A deals and whatnot, that's going to hinder your growth in that area, in that practice area. So I do think that it'd be good to spend a few years in-house, private practice first, just to gain the exposure to deal flow, and also to get a taste of multiple practices and to build up your core skills before diving into in-house position.
Okay, yeah. No, that's a brilliant answer. So, as a foreign lawyer that originally went to Canada, and then you're originally from Hong Kong, and then Canada, and then the UK, and then eventually Singapore. So, I think a lot of students find that in terms of Southeast Asia, Singapore is the economic hub that is forever stable in the Southeast Asia region. So, there are a lot of questions here that circulate the steps that you took as a foreign lawyer to practice in Singapore, and the kind of job that you can only do, and were you hindered in terms of because you qualified with an LPC, did you have to take the Singapore bar?
Right. So with practicing in Singapore, there's kind of two routes that you can go through. One is that you're a Singapore lawyer or going to be qualifying in Singapore. Unfortunately, that's restricted only to citizens and PRs, right? So if you're not a citizen PR, that route is out of the question. You're looking at Route B, which is coming in as an experienced internationally trained lawyer, right? So like myself. Within Singapore, I think there are kind of three tiers of law firms or three buckets of law firms. There's the international US law firms. There are the international, the major kind of Singapore law firms, Allen and Gledhill, Rajan Tan, those guys. And then you got the, I guess more the local firms, kind of like not the big four, but like the rest of the firms. And then also, I think you have a fourth bucket. It's the international offshore law firms. So like Walkers, Maples, Harneys, that do a lot of the Cayman Islands, BVI, Bermuda, Guernsey, those kind of jurisdictions. Um, so I came through the international route, but through Walkers, because I previously was doing private equity work. And a lot of the private equity funds that you're dealing with are from Cayman Islands. And a lot of the kind of joint venture vehicles that you help raise are from BVI. So that's why I kind of came through that route and came through Walkers. Otherwise, I know a lot of friends that were UK qualified, Australian qualified, New Zealand qualified, that came in through a Magic Circle firm or a US firm. So I think those are it depends on your visa restrictions, I guess. But for kind of non-Singapore citizens, it's going to be option B, and you're going to have to come as an experienced lawyer after you're called, preferably after 2 years.
Okay. So the next question is, I think, slightly more of your day to day. How do you sharpen your analytical thinking day to day prior to becoming a lawyer?
Analytical day to day prior to becoming a lawyer. So I think, I think I love to kind of read the news, but more so I like to discuss the news with my friends. And that's for me how I kind of practice my analytical skills, not just kind of, doing a SWOT analysis and kind of going through it myself, which is kind of boring. I like to say, like, talk about Brexit. If it's kind of like a hard Brexit, what would that mean for the economy? What would that mean for Asian networks, right? And I talk to my friends about it. We kind of go back and forth and banter. They give me good kind of perspectives. I give them perspectives. So for me, that's how I kind of hone that skill. The analytical skill is more kind of thinking on your feet, and thinking critically of kind of whatever issue that comes up.
Okay. So in terms of skills, the next question is quite an interesting one. What skill do you think is lacking in the legal work environment, and how do you suggest that we focus and improve on it?
I think the one skill that we're lacking from law school and also during the LPC and during your TC actually is basic project management skills. Um, I guess like as a junior lawyer, most of the time you're facilitating the deal. So you're doing the closing documents, you're making sure the due diligence kind of process is smooth. Also, you're making sure the data room is organized. These are not law things, right? These are not kind of legal analysis and whatnot. This is just basically making sure your folders are organized properly, your naming convention is proper. So these things I feel like it's lacking because we're trained so much to just be these kind of high level thinkers that we don't think about the daily grind, which is basically to make sure all the papers are in the right place. When a senior counsel asks you, where are we on this deal? You know exactly where we are in terms of timeline, in terms of deliverables, what we need to deliver. And these are all kind of project management things. So I think that if maybe at law school level or the LPC level, there can be some course on basic project management, even basic Excel functions, right? Doing equal sum or like even pivot table is pretty advanced, but if you can learn pivot tables as well, that'd be great, right? So yeah, project management.
See, that's a very interesting skill that you highlighted, project management, because I remember when I was doing my internship, I remember just getting scolded all the time, be where exactly are we? What stage are we in? And then I'll just
Right.
go on and go into the law, and then it just gets lost in the legal. And he's like, no, on the timeline, where are we? So
Yeah.
that's actually really interesting that you mentioned that.
But
But
like with the project management thing too, I say that, all lawyers should know it, but with the advent of kind of legal tech right now,
mm,
and especially kind of programs like Trello, where it's meant for project coordination, right? If I update the timeline on Trello and a lawyer logs in, why do I need to update them? It actually facilitates more real-time updates. But that's also for senior lawyers to be adept and comfortable with using technology, right? So I do think that in the years to come, as all of us kind of make it more in the kind of senior ranks, we're going to be using legal tech a lot more efficiently. And we may not need to know project management, but we may need to definitely know legal tech solutions and how to implement it in our day to day.
so how is Singapore faring in terms of legal tech? Because I know that in the UK, even your previous firm, Dantons, they're currently using Kira softwares and GLML and even contract-based softwares. So how is Singapore faring in terms of implementing legal tech?
Yeah, I think implementation is slow right now. I think Singapore and also the rest of Southeast Asia is waiting on the US and the UK to see how implementation goes there, but also to see if there's any kind of client demand. Right now, I don't think there's much client demand. And if that's the case, that means the law firms are not going to push to adopt these new technologies because number one, it costs money to adopt technologies. And number two, it requires the buy-in from everyone that's going to be using it. So all the senior partners and associates and whatnot. So if partners don't see value in it, a firm is not going to adopt it, right? So I think that Singapore is kind of in the region a tech leader, but adoption-wise, there's no pressure yet to adopt. So that's a bit unfortunate, but I think it's going to take some time for sentiments to change.
Okay, so this is going to be a personal question that I'm going to ask. So Daniel, as a private equity lawyer, how how does high yield bonds play a role specifically in what you do? Because especially at UBS, I know they're one of the leaders offering bonds. I
Hmm.
mean, alongside Deutsche, of course, but UBS is one of the main contenders in terms of offering bonds, and in terms of high yield, it's usually much more difficult to not just only procure but to also sell it off and use it in a PE deal. So,
Hmm.
have you worked in a kind of deal that uses it that used it, and what are your thoughts on it really?
Very specific question. I think that's one of the hardball questions you should have asked in the beginning, Lavanya.
Yeah, no, no,
uh,
that's from me because I love high yield. So every time I ask a question, everyone's like, "What on earth is high yield?" So for
I mean,
everyone in the audience, high yield just means like super leverage. Like when a company has terrible credit rating. So for
yeah,
example, yeah, their credit rating is BBB or something in that ballpark. They offer bonds to kind of like bring in capital investors to use the money to either restructure or expand or even do spin-offs.
yeah.
It-
I so it's not really legal advice here. I think I've seen it used in kind of strategies, investment fund strategies, right? And I think with high yield bonds, like you said, they're really risky. So there's often kind of investment restrictions within investment funds to say you can only invest 5% of the capital into high yield bonds. It's kind of one of those things where like crypto, right? There's going to be restrictions on it because it's so risky. So not so much legal advice, but more so it's strategy, investment strategy based on what the business side wants to see. Um, I I do see it, like you said, UBS is a kind of leader in kind of bonds, but also high yield bonds.
Mhm.
I do see it come across my desk, but not, I don't do the structuring side. I only
Mhm.
see the strategy side when they invest into it.
Okay. So do
Yeah,
you
so
think
it's a bit of a
that
non-answer, but you know,
yeah, so do you think like in the current climate that high yield bonds might just be what we need to kind of like help companies to kind of like step away from being absorbed by PE?
well, I mean, there's a time and place for PE, right? I don't think it's all cracked up to be so evil that everyone puts it out to be, right? When, you know, like usually I worked in a PE firm in Hong Kong, and every time we come into investing companies, we provide both referrals for CEOs, for executive suite members, but also our members, our investment team is very knowledgeable. So they're able to kind of give them firsthand advice into what to invest, how to kind of restructure their business operations. So I think there's value in actually having private equity companies come in and take ownership or take control, right?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so once again, it would be an investment decision, like a strategy for how these companies want to raise funds, I guess.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask my next and last question because then I think the questions are less content based. So my question, right, Daniel, is,
Yeah.
for example, if a private equity firm has recently acquired another company, for example, I'm sure you heard about KKR and Viridor in the UK. So KKR recently acquired Viridor, and they kept their CEO, the original CEO of Viridor, as part
Mhm.
of the board member team. So in those situations, would you say, would it be too far of a stretch to say that if a private equity company acquires another company and keeps their CEO or their board intact, that their exit strategy is most probably an LBO later on?
I I wouldn't say that's a foregone conclusion. I
Mhm.
think it just maybe they kept the CEO and the kind of the board right now because they work well together, right? And they don't want to kind of rock the boat too much. Also, maybe familiarity and comfort for the rest of the company to know that management is as usual. Because usually when you kind of buy a new company and shake up the upper management, people get scared. And then you get kind of people leaving the company. There's upheaval, so it may cause instability. So maybe keeping, it may be a calculated decision to keep the board, to keep the existing CEO because they have that kind of impact on the firm to kind of stable it out. Whether they kind of engage in LBO later, that may be an option, but I don't think it's an automatic thing if they keep them on the board.
But would you pitch it, for example, let's say you're going to a law firm interview and you're like, so the fact that they keep their CEO and the board members could mean that they have an exit strategy of an LBO in mind. Could it be a possible scenario?
Yeah, it could be a possibility for sure, right? But hopefully at these interviews, they're not going to ask you the probability of it, because then you're kind of jump into management consultant email kind of questions. So yeah, definitely if it's an interview question, say it's a possibility and lay out all the possibilities, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Okay, so we have another question from T, and they ask, how did you adapt to life as an in-house lawyer where there was minimal supervision? When you were presented with work outside your expertise or challenging tasks, how did you approach it?
So it was tough because when I went in-house, like I said, I was a 1P QE. So, the resources that you would have at a law firm, like even basic LexisNexis, I didn't have. There's no law library, there's no law, there are no professional support lawyers to help me. So a lot of the time I'm just Googling things. And especially when I was learning private equity, I had no clue what investment funds were, let alone kind of hedge funds and, PE funds. So I had to do a lot of Googling. Also, I relied on kind of my colleagues at work, even though they were business guys. They all went to business school, and they had resources. So asking them to see if they have any course materials I can read, that'd be helpful. Also, leaning on the few resources I have in terms of the legal team, asking the senior counsel if you have any resources, asking the GC as well. But also, I did a lot of kind of courses on my own. So I went on Coursera. There's a P and a VC course right now, so I did that course myself. Um, Whatever kind of resource I can do on my own, I basically did self-study, and that's the only way, really. And in-house, it really tests how resourceful you are and how resilient you are in that kind of environment. And if you succeed, I think it really sets you up for a further career down the line as in-house counsel, or even if you pop back into a private firm, you've done all this stuff on your own. So having the support now will just make you even better.
No, that sounds absolutely amazing. I'm just gonna pass some question time to ask her now. I think he has some burning questions for you, Daniel.
Yep.
Yep. So my first question is, why Singapore to practice private equity? You've been to Hong Kong. You practiced in Dentons in Canada. So
Yep.
why do you choose your career destination as Singapore for what you're doing right now?
Yeah. I think there are multiple reasons. There are obviously personal reasons. For me, at the time, my wife got into an MBA program here. So naturally, Singapore would be kind of destination I would try to go to as well. But also in terms of, I guess, looking 5 years, 10 years down the line, I just saw Singapore more as like a stable environment. And as you can tell from current climate in Hong Kong, it seems like the right choice. Um, but so I think stability of the city as well, if I want to develop a long-term career there. And thirdly, I always want to kind of pivot eventually from private equity into a tech role, whether in fintech, legal tech, or completely a business role. So that was always been kind of on the back burner. So I thought, which city between Hong Kong and Singapore is more tech focused? And it has to be Singapore. It definitely is a tech hub right now in Southeast Asia. You have Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, all headquartered here, right? So yeah, for me, it's kind of personal reasons, stability in the city, and also kind of later career goals. That's why I chose Singapore.
Okay, that's really interesting for a reason to choose Singapore.
Yeah.
And then another question is, so you did your training contract at Dentons.
Yep.
Can you explain why do you choose Dentons over the other firms?
Yeah. So in Canada, we have a few international firms. So we have Norton Rose, Dentons, Baker McKenzie, but also really reputable Canadian firms as well. For me, because I knew that my career was eventually going to be international, I needed a brand name behind my name. So when I moved to Hong Kong and Singapore, it is recognizable. Because I've spoken to a lot of lawyers that are trying to pivot into Asia, but they trained at, say, like a mid-tier firm or a smaller solo practitioner, and they're having trouble. And that's naturally because lawyers in Hong Kong don't know kind of like a high street firm in London, right? They know the big names, unfortunately. And that's because of brand recognition. So I chose Dentons because it has an international brand and it's well known. And it's also in the cities that I eventually want to go into. So it was a good fit for me, basically.
Oh, okay, that's a good answer. Thank you very much. I'll hand it to any one of the board members, Lavanya. Oh,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll get a little bit heavy. So Daniel, what do you think of the current so-called scandal that's happening around the banks, and also the fact that the Big Four has been forced to remove their consultancy arm to separate it? So
Mm.
what are your thoughts on what's going on in terms of the banking sector and the auditing sector?
So the banking sector, are you talking about the AML leaks,
Yes, the
like
AML.
FinCEN?
Yeah.
FinCEN. Okay, yes. Uh, I mean, it's bad. It's bad, but I can't say it's new, right? You saw like few years ago also the Paradise Papers,
Yeah.
Cayman leaks as well. I I mean, like we all know that this happens. This stuff happens. Money laundering happens, and we all know that I don't want to speak out of line, but like
Mhm.
banks are involved uh, naturally. But I think it's just good for us to be aware that this happens and that there's kind of ongoing kind of compliance and AML structures involved that we need to continue to beef up.
Mhm.
We're not done yet. And I think that's where kind of blockchain comes into play and new technologies. They have promised to actually eliminate or actually lessen the burden that kind of AML officers have to deal with right now. Because if you look at the AML officer mandates right now, they're fairly flimsy, right? It's also mainly subjective and policy driven.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that with FinCEN, it's inevitable these kind of leaks happen, and you see that happen. So I think I was reading the other day, HSBC stocks were the lowest it's ever been
Yeah.
after the yeah. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. And in terms of Big Four removing their consultancy arm,
Mhm.
I think it's a good thing. I mean, my wife is a consultant, management consultant at Strategy End, part of PwC, and internally PwC separated their consultancy as well as with Deloitte and Deloitte Monitor,
Mhm.
KPMG as well. I think it's good because it's their end goal is not aligned with the audit firm, right? So it doesn't make sense to them kind of be kind of mingled up together. I think there's naturally going to be conflict of interest if they are. So I think it makes sense to separate actually. And I think also same with banks, right? Separating retail out from investment banking makes sense because there's conflict of interest. Investment banking, the end goal is to make money for the firm at the expense of potentially retail investors, right? Whereas commercial and retail line is making sure you're safeguarding their money. So why would that kind of be rolled into one? Same with audit firms, right? Consultancy is a direct conflict with audit firms
Yeah. So
and the service they provide.
so in terms of the banking division, removing its retail and separating its retail arm from its investment banking arm, um, it didn't really work the last time, because I remember the Glass-Steagall Act that came into
Yep.
in the US. It was actually retracted later on. So do
Yep.
you think that this is just a temporary measure until the general public just gets more comfortable before they mesh it back? Because it's all about making sure people are happily going to invest or use auditing firms before they just revert back to whatever happened before.
Yeah. I think I mean, with the whole like reverting back to investment banking uh, thing, that's a political move. That's a political policy thing, right? And it's just the flavor of the day, really. Like it goes in cycles too, right? So investors may be okay with it now, and then the next financial crisis hits, and then we like tighten up all the controls again, and then we have like a more liberal or like more conservative president or whatever that comes in and loosens it up again. So I think it's a political move,
Mhm.
um, not so much kind of driven by policy, like kind of actual monetary policy.
So in terms of private equity, now that you're working in the private equity sector, do you feel that the current tactics is that they're imitating hedge funds in the sense that what they're doing is they're basically buying debt for equity, and then later they'll probably, I don't know, it's not exactly going to be a dawn rate, but it's going to be something similar in that region. Do you think that that's what's happening? Because right now there are so many laws trying to protect companies from going under, from declaring bankruptcy. For example, in UK, you got the corporate governance and insolvency laws that are trying to just aid companies into considering restructuring, and PE firms with a vast amount of capital. I think in 2019 they had like the largest capital in the fourth quarter that they
Mm.
ever had. So do you think that they're probably that this could be an option for PE, and do you think it's a trend that's going to happen?
I think so, because like you said, the amount of dry powder they have is insane right now. They're
Yeah.
just sitting on it, right? And I think they're waiting for kind of companies to tank, to enter insolvency, to actually get a good deal on these companies. I'm also seeing a lot of this stuff in the real estate sector, right? Landlords forfeiting, defaulting, and they're buying them up kind of pennies on the dollar. So I think you will see this is a trend in the next coming year too, because I don't think COVID is done, right? And that's why actually you're seeing a lot of the investment banks this year posted their results, best results ever
Yeah.
during COVID, right? So that's got to tell you something, that there are arbitrage opportunities involved here, and they're available. And I think PE firms are going to capitalize on that, especially in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So speaking of Southeast Asia, do you think that private equity is going to be, because it's not exactly a huge thing in private equity first started in the US and then it traveled to the UK like it always usually does. But it doesn't really hit Asia until later on.
Yeah.
And do you think that right now is going to be the best time ever that Asia is actually going to consider private equity as one of their biggest economic factors?
I think so. I think as a form of investment, but also as an industry, it's growing exponentially in Asia. And the reason, I think the main reason why is because the amount of billionaires that are in Asia right now, I think China is 1 billionaire every day.
Yeah.
Singapore is like the largest collection of billionaires. So you have a lot of private wealth here that people want to spend. And they could be generational wealth too, right? So just remember the Crazy Rich Asians movie,
Yeah.
where the family was like multi-generation money, right? Guarantee you they have a private equity arm in their corporation. And even when I worked in Hong Kong, the private equity company that I worked for belonged to a traditional real estate developer, one of the kind of like old school Hong Kong families, right? So, and this is right now the third or fourth generation. There's sons that want to get into PE, right? Because they're comfortable, that they were raised in America and in the UK, so they understand the risk involved. Whereas like the older folks would probably just invest in real estate, right? So collection of ultra high net worth individuals here in Southeast Asia, and also the kind of tolerance of those kind of engaging in this industry. They're a lot more tolerant now because they're more educated on this kind of investment strategy.
Okay, yeah. So we have a question from Rachel. How do you think the US-China trade war has affected or will affect private equity investment in Asia or in the UK?
So I think the restrictions are already impacting Hong Kong. So for instance, I believe 2 years ago, Trump signed one of his executive orders on limiting kind of Chinese investments into US tech companies, right? Right away, like the firm that I was at, they were looking into investments in Silicon Valley. Right away, they were like, okay, we need to put it on all on hold and reassess, because if Trump blocks it, we can't get our money out even if we invest, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of that like kind of portfolio every day. It's shifting because of the political climate, right? If they put embargoes on certain products, then I guess like it's going to be costlier for you to invest in those products, in those companies that produce those products. So I think it's a very stressful time for investors right now. But also because there's so much movement, there's a lot of opportunity and arbitrage opportunity. But I do see that because that there's this ongoing trade war, you're going to see a lot more regional deals going on. So with the US, it's going to be with Canada, with the UK and whatnot. But in China, or so in Asia, everyone's going to be transacting with China, right? You're seeing right now also with Singapore relocating their offices for ByteDance from Shanghai to Singapore, right? It's all kind of regional deals that you're seeing. So it's good if you're in the right region that you want to be in. It's bad if you want to do kind of cross-border between China and US, I think.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of, well, now that we're talking about China, of course, I do have another question. So Daniel, what do you think about China? Of course, origin coming from Hong Kong originally, this could hit home a little bit. But how do you feel about China trying to steal the throne of the one of the best stock exchanges in Hong Kong and shift
Mm.
it to Shanghai? And how do you think it's going to affect PE? Because a lot of firms have also recently closed their Beijing offices and they're planning to open in Shanghai.
Hmm.
And so that there is that shift that's happening. Even a number of law firms have closed their Hong Kong offices recently as
Yep.
well.
Yep. I think it's inevitable. I think after the handover from Hong Kong to China, naturally the government, whether kind of politics wise, but they would kind of want to elevate other cities into this kind of tier one city status. And Hong Kong, it's still going to be, I think, important for world trade and whatnot. But importance wise within China is going to be significantly reduced. Even now, the money contributed by Hong Kong, the city, towards all of China's GDP is very minimal. And it's actually like even cities like Shenzhen, it's already eclipsing Hong Kong. And Shenzhen used to be kind of much more underdeveloped than Hong Kong, right? Also, you're seeing kind of the move to kind of assimilate Hong Kong into the Greater Bay Area, as they call it. So south of China is called the Greater Bay Area. People don't refer to it as, oh, we'll invest in Hong Kong. They'll say, we'll invest in the Greater Bay Area, which includes Hong Kong, right? So it's that kind of linguistic change, but also the regional change as well. You're seeing slowly they're kind of pulling power away from Hong Kong, pulling the importance away from Hong Kong. And I think in the next 10 years, you can see a further erosion in that, and possibly kind of like pushing Shanghai, Shenzhen, these kind of cities up.
Yeah, so but with Shanghai in having that much power and also understanding that China has a lot of restrictions within the South. I mean, it's not just about tech, but also in terms of trade, they do have a lot of trade restrictions, especially with countries and etc. So with that power and the shift in the general world economy because of different the different Asian market changes as well. So how do you think private equity is going to get affected by it? I mean, it would it would be affected in terms of the services and the companies that could be restricted in terms of international buyings with Shanghai. So what other possibilities do you see?
I mean, if you're changing regional power to China, private equity deals, I assume would originate more from China then. And like I said, I think you're going to see more regional deals versus international deals then, just because of the instability. And you're seeing kind of all across the globe a lot more nationalization and localization initiatives. Um, but China, with the kind of uh, Belt and Road policies, and also within a kind of countries here in Southeast Asia, Malaysia has their own kind of Belt and Road internal policies as well. So you're seeing a lot of regional growth, regional development. So I think that the impact on private equity is that everyone's going to look more internal, insular, versus the international investments, I think, for the bulk of the investors, I think.
Okay. Um, Let me just open it up to the panel. Does anyone have any questions before I ask the Brexit question? Okay, we have a question from Rachel. More of a general question, but in what circumstance does a company like UBS engage external law firms for work?
Uh, they do. All companies do engage external counsel only because, number one, internal counsel may not have the expertise, or number two, you've been working with the firm for so long that you have a relationship, and they're able to kind of charge you lower fees and kind of help you with kind of administrative filings and whatnot. So quite often, I think for us, we deal with a local Singaporean firm here on certain Singapore fund matters, but also we have an international firm that we deal with for international funds. And also we have a Cayman counsel dealing with any of our Cayman funds as well. So often with the kind of companies like UBS, they will have panels where they select the law firms that you're going to be using or you're authorized to use. And that's kind of part of the pitch that law firms do with these companies is to come in and kind of showcase their expertise and to sell their rates and whatnot. And then basically these companies like UBS will say, okay, we want law firm A, B, and C for Singapore matters, and you can only engage them basically.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. Like I do know like even law firms like they basically have their own similar like interbanking kind of thing with just shifting around legal professionals and stuff.
Hmm.
But
And sometimes like law firms will send their lawyers over to do secondment, right? And that's also like better for the firm because you got an expert in-house that you can ask them. But also, once again, it goes back to the relationship. You continuously develop this relationship with the law firms, and hopefully they'll give you kind of better advice and cheaper rates. And that's the goal.
yeah, so is the theory that when a law firm actually sends its trainees for secondment, it's kind of also building a relationship with their existing clients.
Completely, completely. If you think about what a trainee knows, like you barely know anything, right? I mean, it's great learning opportunity for the trainee, but it's mainly to show that we trust you enough to give you one of our trainees, right? So,
Yeah. Okay. So Rachel has another question. Regards to potential introduction of negative interest rates in the UK, can I know how does low interest rate or negative interest rates impact your work in PE?
very simple. Uh, I do not know. This negative interest rates have nothing to do with my role as a lawyer because this is more of a commercial point. Once again, it's investment decisions, right? It has nothing to do with my work, unfortunately. So yeah, none of the agreements I look at deal with interest rates as well, because for me, like I said, it's mainly kind of M&A deals, but also investment funds. This is more aligned with capital markets lawyers and banking lawyers, what they do. So in short, sorry, I don't know.
Out of curiosity, right, Daniel, if I were just to extrapolate from Rachel's question, for example, if there is low interest rate, would you not say it benefits private equity firms because then banks would be eager to kind of give loans and PE firms, they love the high leverage buyouts that they do. So do you think it could impact them positively because then banks would be we're willing to offer you more loans and then PE can kind of like, take a revolving credit facility or
Mhm.
to finance a deal. So do you think it would be positive in that aspect?
It could be. It could be. And obviously, it depends on, say, the KKR, how heavily they rely on these revolving loans, right? Or do they have enough dry powder from investors, from other funds to fund this without getting this kind of loan, right? So it just depends, but it's one of the options, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm gonna give you one of the most interesting questions. It's not difficult because I'm pretty sure you've thought about it. But how does okay? So this is for everyone on this chat who's an aspiring solicitor, because I think that commercial awareness is quite difficult for people to kind of grasp. But in terms of your expertise, Daniel, how do you feel like? What are your thoughts on things that happen in the UK? How does it affect Singapore and vice versa? For example, you talk about Brexit and how it can have imminent impact on Europe and also in Singapore. But how does it cross that barrier to Singapore?
I think because of Brexit, I guess a lot of the kind of bilateral trade agreements and whatnot that before Brexit that Singapore was engaging with the EU for, they would rely on the EU, right, to develop those kind of relationships. So I guess because the UK is leaving EU, they may need to kind of renegotiate all their bilateral agreements now with these companies, with these countries, right? And I think that could impact it in that it could be good for Singapore if they negotiate good terms, but it may not. But also leaves a lot of things in limbo. Um, so I think the impact there is that it's uncertainty. Even now, you don't know if it's going to be a hard Brexit or soft Brexit. So that's the immediate impact, I guess.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really insightful. So we have a question from Dennis Chai. What are the practicing limitations as a foreign lawyer in Singapore?
Uh, the main practicing limitation is that you can't advise on Singapore law, right? So if you come in as an England and Wales lawyer, you can only advise on the laws of England and Wales. But that said, when you're at an international firm, the deals that you do, the contracts may be governed by England and Wales, but most of the time you're advising commercial terms. So they're not jurisdiction specific. So you don't really have to worry about that. But yeah, I think the main restriction is that you can't advise on the local laws. which is Singapore.
Okay, so we have another question from Rachel. What do you think are the news or trends that any student interested in PE should be paying attention to right now? I mean, personally, I would think it would be ESG because I think there's some banks that have pledged for like the green investment and green bonds. What are your thoughts?
Yep. Nope, I was going to say ESG. I was just on a call 2 days ago with Simmons. They're doing kind of these 2-day seminars, and they're focusing on purely ESG and the impact that's having right now in Europe, in England and Wales, but especially in Asia because we're just picking it up now. Also with UBS, I see that we're kind of raising a lot of ESG related funds. And there's also tax breaks that the government will give you if you invest in these kind of companies and you have these policies in place. So ESG.
So in terms of tax, if I were just to ask, when you were a trainee solicitor, when you were going into the firm, how does tax affect PE differently? Because I know that, I mean, it's funny enough that banks would tend to, like the more you borrow from a bank, the lesser tax you have to pay accordingly. And so as a private equity, like working in a specialist such as private equity, and their main idea is to have as much leverage funds to structure distressed companies as possible. So how does that affect your tax? And is there like special tax brackets for PE?
Great question. Short answer, I do not know. Usually we engage tax counsel or we engage KPMG, those guys to kind of do that overall analysis before you kind of engage private equity lawyers. So by the time it comes to us, we see basically like the terms sheet with all the structure in place. So they'll say like form this company in the BVI because of a flow through tax situation here, and form this company in Ireland because it's low tax, this and that. So it comes to us already kind of thought out. All we do is kind of execute. So yeah, I think you need to ask a tax counsel for that advice, unfortunately.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I'm going to leave the questions for the rest of the panel. Shelby and Karishma, I'm sure you guys have some questions. Yeah.
So you said you wanted to go into tech, into the tech area. I'm super interested in, I think ultimately after I get my training contract, I'd love to be in-house counsel for a tech firm. Just in terms of what you personally think is important for someone or a student wanting to get into that field, what do you think a law student should be doing right now to kind of make their CV stand out? Because I mean, getting a training contract is such a rat race. I think everyone can kind of vouch for that. It's difficult. So how can someone stand out in terms of getting into the tech space as a lawyer?
Yep. So I think as a law student now, if you want to get exposure into tech, aside from actually doing an internship or actually going into a startup and doing some work there, I think one thing that you can easily do is to actually bring yourself up to speed with data protection, GDPR, and also I think there's a data protection certification that you can get right now, CIPP certification, right? That you don't need to be a qualified lawyer to do. So these are just kind of ways for you to market yourself as someone that's interested in data protection, data privacy. And I'm seeing right now with a lot of these kind of Apple, Google, Grab in the region as well, hiring like massive teams of data protection lawyers and data protection officers. So the more exposure you have to this in this area, I think it just bodes well for you later on when you want to get into tech.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Shelby?
I've just got one question because I attended like kind of a webinar session previously with a Skadden lawyer, and he was talking about how when he deals with private equity clients, he kind of sees the role he plays as a lawyer kind of as the middleman who kind of talks to the client and then also helps to bring the deal towards the end, and just talk he just felt as if he was more of like a negotiation, like the middle person who was kind of the one that everyone approached when they had problems.
Mhm.
To what extent would you say this is kind of accurate?
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate. Most of the time, as not just a private equity lawyer, but as a corporate lawyer, you're a facilitator. Um, and that's why whenever Lavanya was asking me the kind of strategic tax implications and whatnot, we don't do that that kind of analysis, right? Because that's very kind of tax heavy, or it's banking heavy, restructuring heavy. We're the ones that when they time to get to us, they know kind of what they want, but they maybe just want to know structure wise how to do this and timing, right? So we're more execution people on our end, making sure that the closing is up to date, all the documents are there, negotiating documents with other counsel. So in that sense, I think he is right. Yeah, we're kind of like the middle person. And that's why I said a great skill to learn is project management.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
So
you for that.
brilliant. So as for any last minute questions, does anyone have any last minute questions? Because we got 3 more minutes with Daniel and you really don't want to not ask a question.
So I will ask my question. So you said that project management skills are really important. We have been, university students have been doing a lot of projects, kind of because of COVID-19. We have a lot of time, and then we have been trying to do something out of our time. But how would you say we express our project management skills in our applications to law firms?
How do you pitch it? I think you can pitch it by basically talking about the projects that you've done, right? Um, it's basically just tell them that you've been doing these kind of projects, what kind of role you had, what kind of programs did you use? Did you use Excel? Um, and also like timeline wise, how did you kind of facilitate timelines? How did you ensure that all stakeholders contributed on time and you delivered on time as well? These are things that I think law firms would like to know, because once again, as a junior, they look to you to manage the process. And when they come to you and to ask you what the status is, you need to know. So it'd be kind of useful for them to understand, how do you organize your thoughts, right? Whether you use apps like Trello, or are you kind of adept to creating your own Excel tracking sheet? Do you know pivot tables, this and that? It's just helpful for them to know what kind of stage you're at in that kind of project management space.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up as the time is here. Can we all just say thank you to Daniel so very much for joining us and giving us an insight? And also at the Southeast Asia Network, we have one more upcoming Meet the Lawyer, which is with Chris Lee, who is also my mentor. So I suggest that everyone come on. And also, if you did miss parts of this webinar, you can find it uploaded. I think Ashar will be taking care of that. And we're also looking to expand the Southeast Asia network. So please do kind of like go onto LinkedIn, click and kind of like explore the opportunities that we're possibly giving. And honestly, thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. That was really, really insightful.
Yeah, happy to. Great questions. Some hard balls. So thank you for that.
No worries.
Yeah, great speaking. But yeah, if you guys have any further questions, I'm fairly responsive on LinkedIn, so feel free to message me. And if I can help, I'll definitely do it.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
great.
Ashar,
Thank you.
anything else?
No, I just thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Daniel, for giving up some of your time to speaking to us. And we really appreciate your support for our network. So yeah,
Yeah, no
thank you
worries.
so much. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, yeah. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
All right. Bye.